Hello and kia ora koutou to any fellow Kiwis in the house. So my name is Emma Blomkamp. I am from New Zealand and I started practicing co-design there when I was working for a social innovation agency. I'm going to give you an example of some of that work in a moment, although I admit that is an example of co-design with community rather than co-design for policy, and I'll talk about why it's so hard to get some actual examples of co-design for policy. I now work at the Policy Lab at the University of Melbourne. So we're a research unit that focuses on studying public policy making and doing research that helps understand policy making systems and improve policy, basically. Since moving to Melbourne for that job 18 months ago, I've really been focusing on research on co-design and the potential for co-design in improving public policy processes and outcomes. I think it has huge potential, but I'm here both as an enthusiastic practitioner and a skeptical academic. So I'll share both of those perspectives with you. Sorry, I'm going to stick to my notes so that I stick to time and don't indulge the academic side of myself in going on too much. I am going to follow on from some of the things that David was saying in terms of some caution with the term, and you'll see I will define co-design in a very specific way, thinking about what it could mean in a public policy context, and I'll also talk about the risk that we're treating co-design as a policy unicorn. Before I explain what I mean by that, I'll share with you how I became so interested in co-design. Can we go back?
Sorry.
So I was working in a social innovation agency in New Zealand, and the example I'm going to share with you is a project where we used co-design in the design and delivery of a project, and it was one that got me really excited about the potential for co-design. So we were commissioned to design a program that would increase the number of young people driving with the right licence in a certain suburb in Auckland. Government agencies had recognised that there were so many people driving either without a licence or in breach of their learner licence that in some communities unlicensed driving had basically become a norm. So they commissioned us to design and with our creative agency partner deliver a social marketing program to address this issue. It was primarily a road safety issue to them, but we found out that it was a much broader social and economic problem as well, especially as not having a licence can become a barrier to employment, and there were also rising rates of youth unemployment in the areas we were working in. Now, we knew that you don't just change people's behaviour by telling them something is wrong to do, and we also had a mandate to work with the community, which was great. So we used co-design principles and methods to ensure that members of the community, in particular people with lived experience of the issue, whether that was young people or family members of young people, were participating meaningfully throughout the process. So for example, Valerie, who's on the left up there, who is an amazing community leader in her own right, but also someone with lived experience of the issue, and someone we were very lucky to have take part in our project. She joined us in the first phase as a community researcher, where we recruited about 20 community members to go out and gather insights on the issue and help us to interpret that. We used that information to develop insights that a co-design group worked with to help us get focused on who we should actually be focusing on with this program, what behaviour we might change, and how we should do that. So one of the things that our community researchers found out, for instance, was that a lot of the young people driving around were reluctant rule breakers, and in fact were doing so with the support or influence of their family members. And although we'd been commissioned to deliver a program for young drivers, we actually had to work with families. So as well as getting insights and ideas from community members and working with them to test and then implement these ideas, some of the people who took part in our project became leaders of the issue and began influencing change in their families and community beyond their participation in the project. Valerie, for instance, started hosting educational licensing workshops at the marae she managed, and she encouraged her younger son, she had a couple of teenage sons, and she encouraged the older one to actually start teaching the younger one to drive, and then to go on and become a coach for other young people in the community. They also shared their story in the media and wanted to make sure that others in the community weren't risking driving around without a licence and risking getting into trouble with the police or racking up fines in the court or not getting a job. So they became quite passionate advocates of the issue through taking part in our process, and that helped me to see some of the value of participating in a project, as well as the way that it shaped the final product that we were working on. And so we also saw that the project was a success through an independent evaluation that concluded that Behind the Wheel did achieve its key goals of increasing knowledge about the different stages of licensing, how to get a full driver's license, and the different license conditions. So the quotes up here show some of the positive feedback we received. The first one was something that came through in the evaluation, and the second one was something we heard directly from the project partner. The biggest indicator of success for me, though, was that the community took ownership of the project once the government funding ran out and our agency wasn't involved anymore. So Behind the Wheel Mangere is now being run by a family services organisation who felt that the program was a really positive and critical part of bringing their community together, supporting young people and making the roads safer. Seeing results like this made me one of those really annoying people who seem to have drunk the Kool-Aid and go around and say, let's do co-design, folks. And I'm not the only one. So there's been a plethora of claims in recent years about what co-design can do and why we should be using it, especially in the public service. Co-design, we're told, can help us to generate more innovative ideas, ensure policies and services better meet the needs of users, achieve economic efficiencies by improving responsiveness, foster cooperation and trust between different groups, meaningfully engage the hard to reach, that was in quote marks, and achieve support for change. So there's a risk here that we're treating co-design as a policy unicorn, that is, as some kind of mythical creature that has never been seen in real form. We're investing in it a lot of our hopes and dreams, yet are we actually going to see it anywhere in reality? So one of the things I've noticed is when I've gone looking for examples of co-design for policy, I keep coming across some really good examples of co-design for human services, but to try and go upstream and find examples of co-design being used in a policy making process is a bit harder. So when I'm talking about policy making here, I'm thinking of it as a problem-solving activity that involves government arranging its resources in a certain way to achieve specific aims or objectives. It covers a wide range of activities and tools, and it could be commissioning a service or establishing an agency, but it also includes making regulation or legislation, providing funding, doing market interventions such as tax or subsidies, even analysis, audits, assessment, etc. So it's a wide range of activities, but what we're talking about is the serious business of government decision making. And in this context, co-design may seem like little more than a buzzword. So in order to get beyond the buzzword, I think we should get clear on what we mean by co-design for policy. So in a recent paper, I've put forth a definition of co-design, borrowing from Liz Sanders, and talking about co-design for policy as a process, a set of principles, and the application of practical tools. I have to thank Chris Vanstone and colleagues at Taxi, Chris is speaking next, for really pointing out this first point about co-design as an innovation process. So what's key here is it's more than engagement, and it's the application of design thinking and methods in an iterative process to create something new. The principles presented here are based on those that some of my Dutch colleagues found in a review of design studies literature. And right now I just want to highlight that last one, participation, which, as we've already heard, is often known as the participatory mindset, and the idea that people are the experts in their own lives, that they are creative and that they have a right to participate in making decisions about things that affect their lives. So finally, while co-design is more than a mere toolkit, the practical methods it offers are really important. Unlike, say, deliberative models of policy making, which focus on talking, as David said, and Jack's before, talking about the importance of making and enacting, that co-design helps to bring alive things that might otherwise remain hidden beneath the surface. So if we apply this definition, we can actually see what co-design is and isn't in practice. And a key point is that for something to be legitimately called co-design, rather than another model of design, people with lived experience must be active participants throughout the design process, not just consulted on decisions that other people have made. That's a real challenge for policymakers, as it requires some quite different ways of working. So, can we just... Oh yeah, that's right. Beyond the conceptual confusion that we are hearing about, are a number of other challenges when it comes to co-design for policy. Now, it's a little simplistic to put traditional government and the discipline of design as polar opposites. However, people practicing and researching co-design for policy do come across and experience these tensions. Co-design, with its emphasis on participation and collaboration, brings even more challenges to the policy-making process than other design-led models. In particular, it increases complexity and diminishes control. And policy officials don't generally respond well to the risk of diminished control and increased complexity. Bureaucratic systems are not designed to be experimental or responsive. So effectively applying co-design in the public sector is going to require some really significant changes to the structure and culture of government. It's not impossible, but it will require a lot of work on many levels to embed new kinds of knowledge, practice, and structures in government. There's also methodological and ethical issues of participation. So, as we've already heard, people might be experts in their own lives, but that doesn't mean they're automatically capable and ready to participate in a co-design process. So I also have some similar questions to David's and asking, if we're looking at a co-design process and if we want to build our knowledge about them, we need to ask questions like, who participates? How? What barriers to participation need to be overcome? Other dilemmas of co-design that I won't go into in detail here because I'm running out of time, but I will just name 3 of them that have been identified by some Irish researchers. They point to the gap between co-design research and conventional forms of evidence in a policy context, the legitimacy of co-design activity as perceived by stakeholders and beneficiaries, and the embeddedness, or lack thereof, of co-design within the policy innovation system. So these are just some things to be aware of as thorns in the journey to co-design for policy. Now, with all these challenges, why bother? Well, evidence from other fields where the practice of co-design is more established does give us some hope that co-design, or belief that co-design may have a transformative effect on participants and may indeed improve the efficacy and efficiency of public services. So one place to look for evidence is the burgeoning literature on experience-based co-design in healthcare. This is a very specific model of co-design, and it basically, generally, there's some variations, but it usually involves a 5-stage process where patients, carers, and healthcare workers focus on improving patients' experience of a service. Now, in fact, here in New South Wales is one of the places where it's been seen to be used successfully, and there was an academic evaluation by Donella Piper and colleagues of how the Department of Health used experience-based co-design in emergency rooms. They found that it gave patients, carers, and staff a deeper understanding of each other's experience, and as well as strengthening relationships between those involved in the process, The 7 hospital sites that they studied were able to implement strategies to address the issues raised in the co-design process. A couple of examples of these are improving patient and carer comfort and privacy, and improving communication and information flow between staff and patients and carers. Participatory approaches to urban design and planning are another place to look, but I'm going to jump to my final slide because I'm just about out of time. And I want to mention 3 plausible hypotheses that I've identified. So, by reviewing the literature on co-design and related approaches in policy, planning, and public service design, I've identified 3 hypotheses or theories of change about how co-design might benefit public policy. So the first one is that by involving such a range of participants, that's citizens, stakeholders, professionals, experts, and other end users of policy, co-design can ensure that the definition of problems and the generation of solutions better meets the needs of the public and the government. This is obviously a good thing, if it's possible. In particular, it means that co-design may actually be able to overcome the all too common problem of policy interventions being based on flawed assumptions. Secondly, offering methods and principles for improving idea generation and experimentation should stimulate innovation within the public sector. And this follows the general line of thinking about design thinking as it's been applied in the private sector. Third and finally, participating in a co-design process is likely to strengthen relationships and build trust and mutual understanding between those who are participating. And in this context, that would be between policy workers, citizens, and other stakeholders. If well facilitated, a co-design process should build shared understanding of issues and experiences, encourage dialogue and empathy, and create a shared feeling of ownership about an issue. If this can occur, then co-design may indeed help to build social capital and address disengagement from politics and democracy, and increase trust in government and in each other. But to know whether, when, where, how, and why any of these may be true, we need better documentation, research, evaluation, and analysis of co-design work in government. And I'd say that's a responsibility for all of us, whether we're practitioners, researchers, or enthusiasts or skeptics. Without it, co-design may just remain a policy unicorn. Thank you.